Genesis 6, verse 4. And yes, friends, we have arrived at the Nephilim. You may be familiar if you've been around the study of the Bible for a while that one of the running jokes that you can often throw into a room of Christians is, let's talk about the Nephilim. It's one of the most debated topics in Genesis, and there's a lot of question as to, are these giant figures? Are they angelic beings? Are they the strange offspring of Seth or something like that? And we saw that introduced in the prior couple of verses. So there's a lot going on with this particular issue. I'm not going to explain it all today. What we're going to do is take two runs through Genesis 6:4. We're going to do the first half of the verse in this video, the second half of the verse in the next one. Then we're going to have a special Saturday edition getting into some of the different ways in which the whole Nephilim or giants issue has been interpreted, especially with the focus on ancient interpretations in both early Judaism as well as early Christianity. So I'll get into that in a separate video. Can't answer it all today. But for today, let's just read the Greek, and then I'll point out what really causes the issue. And it's really the third word on the screen. So let's get into the first half of the verse. Hoi de gigantes esan epites ges, en tes hemeras ekenais, kai met ekena. So the first loaded word here, and you see a nominative plural masculine, is gigantes or gigas. And that in Greek just means giant or very large. But if you have read the English translations of Genesis 6:4 drawing on the Masoretic text, you realize that it doesn't say giants there in some English translation. Typically, you're going to have something else. And here is a sort of sampling of ancient attempts to translate the Hebrew word, which I do think is accurately conveyed in the Masoretic text. This is the Nephilim, and so that's what you might be familiar with. And even back in the day, a long time ago, not just today in modern scholarly circles, but way back then, there was a huge debate about what exactly that word means. Of course, the Septuagint translator takes it as giants. So does Jerome with gigantes. Now, the Targum writer, the Aramaic Targum writer of Onkelos here, uses instead the Givaria, which is something like a warrior or a strong man. Same thing really in the Syriac Peshitta. And then the later Jewish translator Aquila essentially tries to translate Nephilim. He doesn't try to give us some sort of substitute for it, but he basically takes the Hebrew root, which does look like the word for to fall, nafal there, and gives us a substantival participle, the ones who have fallen, hoi et piptantes, or something like that, or the fallen ones. Symmachus instead goes with the strong man option, hoi biaioi, and even some other Greek traditions have something like hoi dunatoi, which would again be something like the strong ones, similar to perhaps Targum Onkelos. So you see, it's kind of a big spectrum. You either have the mysterious Nephilim or attempts to translate it as fallen ones. You've got giant ones. You've got warriors and so forth. And we'll get into some of the further details on that as to why that is and so forth when I make that special video. But just an interesting way to kick things off, and that's why this verse has generated a lot of interest and conspiracy theories and all kinds of things, both in antiquity and today. Well, let's continue. So these giants, Ason, that's going to be a third plural of Ami, so they were, and they were upon the earth. And then we have in tes hemerais, in the days. Which days? Those days. So in these particular days where you had the sons of God pursuing the daughters of men, we saw that in the prior verse. In those days, that's when you have these giants. But both in the original Hebrew and in the Greek here, we have this very curious clause, kai met ekena, and after, ekena there being after that point. So it's in those days that we have the giants, but also afterwards we have the giants as well. And that's a little breadcrumb for something that shows up later in the Pentateuch. So Numbers 13:33 is the other time we have Nephilim mentioned. And this is when you have the sort of spies or the scouts going out, examining the land of Canaan. They come back afraid and so forth. So their initial report says this, and there we saw the Nephilim, the only other time we see that. And the Septuagint has gigantes, just like here. The sons of Anak, so we find out a bit more about who they were, at least in that day, several centuries later, who come from the Nephilim. Now, what's interesting is that this clause, who come from the Nephilim, trying to describe these sons of Anak, that's omitted in the Septuagint. It appears that the original Hebrew is trying to explain some of the background of these Nephilim, but the Greek translator takes that part out. And then the Israelite spies say that we seem like grasshoppers compared to them, and that's why we were afraid. So quite fascinating. Can't answer all the questions today. Just want to whet your appetite for more about who exactly these giants are and what we should make of them. So stay tuned for more when we get to the second half of the verse, as well as a special video to come.